The exact moment I agreed to be Sarah's boyfriend, I was suddenly thrown 7 years into the future of our marriage. I blinked and opened my eyes to find myself holding a wrinkled divorce settlement. My son was standing there, looking at me and letting out a loud, heavy sigh. He told me that every time I saw Uncle Brad, I threatened to divorce Mom, but I never actually had the nerve to go through with it. He asked me to just stop causing drama. I looked at him sternly, but I didn't try to argue or explain myself this time. Instead, I just quietly started putting my things into a suitcase. On the day I actually walked out, Sarah held on to our crying son to stop him from running after me. She told him to just behave himself. She said I would be back in less than 3 days, because I had pulled this same stunt a dozen times before. She asked where I could possibly go anyway, but nobody in that house expected that 3 days would turn into forever, and I would never step foot inside that home again. Years later, a 19-year-old Sarah would ask me with red, puffy eyes why I was backing out of our deal. She would remind me that I promised, and beg me not to leave her. I had originally agreed to date Sarah on a hot summer afternoon. The heat was intense, making the noise of the bugs outside the school feel loud and annoying, and the hallway was packed with loud students. Sarah ran back and forth in front of me 3 times, her plain white shirt moving in the wind. The last time she turned to run toward the stairs, she took a couple of steps, and then rushed back to me. Her eyes were bright, and her voice sounded tight and nervous. She told me not to dare back out, promising to come get me first thing in the morning. From high school all the way through college, everyone knew how much Sarah liked me. Just because I once said I would consider dating her, Sarah, a wealthy girl who never cared about grades, suddenly focused and studied like crazy. She worked her way up from the bottom of the class, doing just enough to get into the same university I was attending. Her interest in me was always obvious, but never aggressive. Even when we were at the same college, she didn't pressure me. The most she did was follow me around everywhere, which kept other girls away. If anyone asked her about it, she would just laugh and say she was taking a number and waiting in line. She would tell people to get lost, claiming it was first come, first served. And since she had been chasing me since high school, nobody else could cut in front of her. After Sarah walked away that day, I touched my ear, which felt hot, and my head was full of the image of her happy face. When I woke up the next morning, Sarah wasn't there to pick me up. Bright sunlight was coming through the window. I squinted automatically, but then I realized the bed was soft, not the hard mattress from my dorm room. I looked around, feeling my chest tighten. I saw a fancy light fixture on the ceiling and a thick carpet on the floor where every thread looked expensive. I wondered where I was. A second later, the heavy bedroom door opened with the sound of light footsteps. I looked up and saw a small boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, walking toward me with a grumpy look on his face. He called me Dad. Seeing his face made me freeze. He looked exactly like me. I glanced at the calendar sitting on the desk and saw the year was 2025. I wondered if I had gone to sleep and woken up years in the future. I looked back at the kid. His eyebrows, eyes, nose, and mouth were all exact copies of mine. I studied his face, totally amazed. The image of 19-year-old Sarah popped into my head, the girl who had just confessed her feelings to me yesterday with red ears. I wondered if, after all this time, Sarah was the one I had actually married. I looked around the room again. There wasn't a single sign that a mother lived there, not even a wedding picture. I got down on my knees and looked at the boy. I asked him his name, knowing kids give up information easily. He answered right away that his name was Timmy, and asked what I was doing now. He really was her son. I felt relieved, but also weirded out. I asked him if that was a polite way to talk to his father. The kid seemed incredibly spoiled, but looking at his face, which was basically a clone of my own, my anger disappeared, and I couldn't bring myself to scold him. While I was still confused, Timmy grabbed a crumpled piece of paper from the nightstand. He clearly couldn't read, but he seemed to know what the paper was. He handed it to me and said I was doing it again. He looked at me with disappointment and said that every time I saw Uncle Brad, I pulled out this paper and fought with Mom. He said Uncle Brad already told us that even if he brings his and Aunt Karen's kid over, it wouldn't bother us, but I still almost pushed him down. As he spoke, he suddenly shoved me. He said that was for Uncle Brad. The boy was surprisingly strong, and the push knocked me back onto the edge of the bed. At the same time, his words hit my brain like rocks, grinding against my mind, my eyes focused on the paper. The words divorce settlement were large and dark. In the next second, those words turned into red lights and shot into my head. Suddenly, a flood of painful memories that didn't belong to me, the memories of the future Jack, poured into my mind. The final scene in that memory was the mocking, happy face of a man. It was the Uncle Brad that Timmy had mentioned. He was Sarah's lover, the famous celebrity Brad Thompson. The pain that came with the memories felt like a tight net around my chest, making it hard to breathe. I almost fell over, sinking to my knees beside the bed. Timmy looked at me with a tiny bit of worry, but it disappeared as fast as it came. He let out a little breath. It was today that Brad had shown up at our door, acting bold and showing off. And the person who had opened the door for him, the person who had welcomed him in happily, was Timmy. The older Jack had been in the kitchen making a snack for his son when he heard people talking and came out. The first thing he saw was Brad dressed in expensive designer clothes with a fancy watch, taking off his sunglasses and looking around the house like he owned it. Jack couldn't understand it because Sarah had promised him she had gotten rid of Brad. He wondered why Brad would dare to show his face again, but he didn't want to ask. With a cold look, he told Brad to get out, but Timmy rushed forward and stood in front of Brad to protect him. He said Uncle Brad was a guest he invited and told me I was being rude. Well, Jack was shaking with anger, but he never guessed that something even worse was about to happen. Brad said that he and his ex-girlfriend Karen had a child who was already 3 years old. Just 5 months ago, Sarah had sworn to Jack that she would cut off all of Brad's money and support and never see him again. The color left Jack's face. He kept pulling at Timmy, trying to get him to go back inside. He was scared of his son hearing that his mother was involved with another man's family. But Timmy just looked up at the man and said that when his little brother arrived, he would play with him. He told Uncle Brad not to worry because he and Mom would both love the new kid. Jack couldn't believe it. The child he had put his whole heart and soul into raising had taken his mother's side against him. And then the kid looked at him calmly and said he was acting crazy. In the memory, Jack and Sarah had decided to have a child in their 3rd year of marriage. By then, Sarah's company was public, and her career was set. After their son was born, Jack trusted Sarah's promises and stepped down from the company to be a full-time stay-at-home dad. He had given almost everything to this child, only to get total disrespect in return. Brad would secretly take Timmy out for fun, let him eat junk food, and give him whatever he wanted. Timmy would tell anyone who listened that his mom was a big star, not some boring nobody. Jack didn't like relying on others. Even with plenty of nannies in the house, he did everything himself. To take care of his son, Jack stopped caring about his appearance. He wore comfortable clothes, stopped styling his hair, and lost his old style. Compared to the always fashionable Brad on TV and in magazines, Jack looked plain and boring. Brad's arrival completely destroyed Jack's fake idea of a peaceful, happy life. Brad had messed with him more than once. At first, it was just Jack accidentally seeing Sarah on Brad's social media. Later, Brad even called Jack late at night to challenge him. He told Jack that he should know about him and Sarah by now. He said Sarah liked that he was young and handsome, and that he reminded her of how Jack used to be. He said it was normal for an old guy like Jack to lose his woman. Brad had gotten with Sarah at 19, and now, 2 years later, he was only 21, using his youth and looks as weapons. But at that time, Sarah found out about the call. She had blocked him for 2 months. So this time he had come secretly without telling Sarah. He pulled out a photo of his child on his phone, still bragging. He said it was pathetic that Sarah lied and said she was going to block him. But behind Jack's back, she was secretly giving him money and jobs. He mentioned a new luxury apartment building uptown that Jack couldn't get on the list for, saying Sarah had the developer give him a unit directly for him and his kid. Brad was a mess when he left, but he remembered to tell Timmy not to mention what happened today to Sarah. Timmy puffed out his chest and promised to keep it a secret. As for Jack, Brad wasn't worried he'd say anything. In the 2 years he'd been involved with Sarah, Brad had come to understand Jack better than anyone. Jack was stubborn and proud. When it came to the men around Sarah, he had become numb. Brad's plan was to use the child to make Jack angry. Apparently, it worked. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the 19-year-old Jack waking up here. Although the memories of 31-year-old Jack filled my mind, my soul was still that of my 19-year-old self. I hadn't personally lived through those years of thankless hard work. So the anger was a little less intense, but the bitterness was clear on my face, which must have looked scary. I grabbed Timmy's small wrist and asked sharply who taught him to speak to his father like that. 31-year-old Jack would never have dared to scold him. He would only blame himself for not being good enough. By the end of the story, he had stopped looking for other people to blame and just blamed himself. He was convinced that his wife's affair and his son's attitude were his own fault. Timmy had probably never seen this side of his father. No matter how angry his dad had been in the past, he had always been gentle with him. The boy shook with fear, and his eyes immediately turned red. The next second he bit down hard on the back of my hand. I yelled in pain and let go. He started crying and screaming that he hated me and called me crazy. He said I wasn't his dad, and he didn't want me to be. Timmy had said things like this before, but in the memories, Jack's first reaction was always fear. He would immediately hug him and apologize while crying, saying he was sorry and wasn't good enough. But I just watched him coldly. I asked him what made him think I was so eager to be his dad. He froze at my words, his fingers digging into the bedsheet. But his past experience of fighting with his father made him brave. He stuck his neck out, determined to win the argument. The words that came out weren't an apology, but another attempt to hurt his father. Timmy's face was red, and tears were in his eyes as he glared at me. He called me a coward and said I only threatened divorce to get Mom's attention. He said I didn't actually have the guts to do it. Even though my soul didn't care, a wave of pain went through my body. Just then, a cold voice came from the bedroom doorway, asking Timmy who taught him to talk like that. I looked up and met the eyes of the woman leaning against the doorframe. Compared to her young high school self and her fresh-faced college look, the Sarah before me was much older. She must have just come from a business dinner. Her shirt was unbuttoned at the top, her sleeves were rolled up, and a jacket was over her arm. Sarah walked in and looked at Timmy with a flat expression. She told him if she heard him say anything like that again, she was taking away all his toys. Timmy sniffled and shut his mouth, not daring to say another word. Sarah glanced at me, then at the divorce papers on the floor. She asked what this was about now. Her eyes looked tired, and she smelled a little bit like alcohol. She said I had been waving that thing around for 3 years and the paper was worn out. She told me I could at least print a new copy. Then she paused, her voice getting harder. She said if I dared to divorce her, she would make sure Timmy's life was miserable. The image in my mind of the happy, lively Sarah in her white t-shirt faded away instantly. All that was left was this unrecognizable, awful person in front of me. I stared at her for a long moment, then raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. I didn't understand it. The 19-year-old Jack was brave and emotional, capable of loving and hating strongly. Faced with cheating, the Jack should have fought back and left. But the older Jack had only felt sadness, sinking deeper into despair every day, unable to even slap Sarah. Thinking of this, I raised my left hand again, but Sarah caught my wrist. She told me that was enough. Her face was red with anger, but she quickly changed her expression to be softer. Her fingers slid up my wrist and held my hand tightly, as if she was afraid I'd pull away. She told me not to scare the boy. She said we already agreed to let the past go and have a good life. She told me I was the only one for her, and that never changed. Looking at her face, which was even more beautiful than before. I only felt sick. I bent down, picked up the divorce papers, and told them to get out without looking up. Sarah clenched her fists, watching me, but didn't move. It was Timmy who realized I was yelling at them, and mumbled that I could yell all I wanted, but when I tried to feed him later, he wouldn't eat a single bite. Sarah made a noise of annoyance and frowned at him. Timmy went quiet and pulled at his shirt. She thought for a moment, then said, "I needed to calm down." With that, she turned, put a hand on Timmy's head, and led him out of the room. Once outside the bedroom, Sarah walked a few steps, then stopped and turned to her son. The boy looked so much like Jack, especially his clear, bright eyes. The first crack in her relationship with Jack had appeared when Timmy was born. Back then, Jack had screamed and raged. She had been terrified he would reject the child. But then he started spending his nights watching the baby, staring at Timmy's face. And just like that, Sarah had found his weak spot, the key to keeping their fake peace. But today's Jack seemed different. He was still cold toward her, but there was a new finality in his attitude. She felt as if something was about to break through his long silence. Before she could think more, Timmy pulled on her sleeve. He was still angry with his father. He asked if Uncle Brad could be his dad because his dad didn't like him, so he didn't want to like him either. Sarah narrowed her eyes and looked at him. She asked who Brad thought he was, and said he wasn't worthy of being his father. Her patience for him ended there. And Timmy, from the moment he could understand, he had learned that he was the chain that held Dad there. He believed as long as he was around, his dad would never leave. He knew what his mother liked to hear. Whenever his parents fought, if his dad still showed concern for him, his mom would pay him a little more attention. Timmy looked at the closed bedroom door and said it wouldn't even be half an hour before Dad would be begging to read him a bedtime story. He ran off to his own room and shut the door tight, mimicking his father. But he yelled that he was still mad, and if Dad didn't apologize, he wouldn't let him read. Sarah stood between the two closed doors, not bothered by the drama. Half an hour? Given how much Jack cared about his son, he'd pull himself together and come out in less than 10 minutes. Sarah sat on the sofa, waiting. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes. Half an hour. An hour. Inside the bedroom, I stared at the person in the tall mirror. He was wearing old clothes, his hair was messy, his face was pale, and his big eyes looked dead. He looked like a zombie. I touched the face in the mirror. I was speechless. I wondered how I ended up like this. I searched my mind, putting together the last 12 years. Before we even finished college, Sarah's family had financial trouble. Refusing to give up, she started over from nothing. In 2007, when the stock market was doing well, I took all my savings and bet it all with her. We cashed out at the top, multiplying our money many times. That money started the Apex Group. In those early years, we supported each other. We faced rejection from the outside world, but back in our cheap rental, we could still smile. I would hold a tired Sarah in my arms and tell her we were going to make it. Later, the small company grew bigger, with more people and money, but the house felt emptier. Sarah was only 27 when she was invited back to our college to speak. She was young and sharp. During the questions, a young man asked if she was single. Sarah smiled and showed her ring, saying she had been married for 3 years. The young man held the microphone and said that nobody knows the future and plenty of married people get divorced. He bowed like a mischievous child and said he was just kidding. Sarah finally looked at him properly. The boy sat down, looking satisfied. Neither of us took it seriously. Later, I learned the boy's name was Brad. By the time I found out, I had already quit my job at the company after Timmy was born. And Brad had gone from being an intern to Sarah's personal assistant. I walked into her office to find him with his arm around her shoulder. Sarah was letting him do it. When he saw me, he jumped up in a panic. I told him to get out. He looked at Sarah, bit his lip and left, but turned back to say there was nothing going on. Sarah stood up and told me not to mind him, that he was just a kid with no boundaries. Her calm attitude made me think I was crazy, until a month later when I got a disgusting picture message. In the photo, Sarah was leaning against Brad just like she used to lean against me. When Sarah found out, she swore and apologized, explaining there was nothing between them. She fired Brad and stayed by my side, afraid I would leave. During those nights, I would lie there staring at the baby, Isiron, thinking how much better things would be if he didn't exist. But who could have imagined that the child I sacrificed everything for would turn against me? I looked at the person in the mirror, and the light returned to my eyes. 31-year-old Jack was dead. He had too much baggage. So he called me here to save him. After cleaning up the room, I combed my hair to look neat. I opened the door. The living room was empty. I called over to Mr. Henderson, the cook, and told him to make me some noodles because I was hungry. He wiped his hands on his apron and hesitated, saying it was late. I looked at him coldly and asked if he could do it or not, and if not, he didn't have to come in tomorrow. He mumbled that the madam paid his salary, not me. I scoffed. I asked him if he thought Sarah wouldn't listen if I told her to fire him. I told him to test it if he wanted. I walked to the table and sat down. Mr. Henderson went into the kitchen. I ate slowly. The clock chimed 10. I remembered that usually I would read Timmy a story now. I didn't move. A moment later, Timmy opened his door holding a book. He stood there watching me. He said he wasn't mad anymore and would allow me to read to him, but I had to hurry up and eat. I glanced at him and went back to my noodles. I didn't say a word. Compared to the older Jack, I felt no connection to this kid. Timmy got genuinely angry and said if I didn't read now, he wouldn't listen to a single word ever again. He slammed the door. My hand paused, but I didn't get up. Mr. Henderson was wiping the table and said in a rude tone that I shouldn't be so stubborn and that I would just end up begging for the boy's attention later. I wiped my mouth and looked at him. I decided that before I left, I had to get rid of him. Sarah didn't come home that night. She had her assistant say there was work to do. Perhaps Sarah had given an order because when I asked the assistant to fire Mr. Henderson, he was paid and sent away quickly. When I woke up the next day, there was a new cook named Dave who greeted me eagerly and asked if I was taking the young master to school. Children have short memories. Timmy woke up and ran to me, hugging me and asking for specific food for lunch. In the past, I handled everything for him. I pushed him away gently and told him to let Dave get him changed. Once he was ready, he paced by the door and asked if I was driving him. I didn't look up and said no, the driver would take him. I told him from now on, the nanny would take him. He didn't understand. He just scratched his head and left angrily. I didn't have much to pack. I walked out of the house with one suitcase and the divorce papers. Dave chased after me asking where I was going and if I'd be back for lunch. I stopped, looked back at the house, then walked away saying I wouldn't be back. I quickly found an apartment downtown. The rent was high, but I paid it easily. Compared to the money I now controlled, it was nothing. I now had the soul of a 19-year-old with the experience of a 31-year-old. I submitted my portfolio and resumed to get back in the game. That evening, my phone rang. Dave asked why I didn't come back because the young master was throwing a fit. He sent me a video. In the video, Timmy checked rooms for me and then asked Sarah where I was. Sarah looked annoyed and told him I would be back in a few days like always. She laughed and said I would abandon her before I abandoned him. Timmy cheered up and said if I didn't come back, he would just ask Uncle Brad to read to him because Uncle Brad's voice was nicer anyway. I closed the video. The pain in my heart was sharp. The interview at Cortec went well. The final round was with the CEO, Jessica. As I walked in, I saw a little girl offering me candy. I took it, and then Jessica walked in. I recognized her from my memories. She was dressed sharply. She reached out her hand. I told her we were divorced and to call me by my name. She seemed pleased with my work, but asked why I wasn't working for Sarah. I told her frankly I was getting a divorce. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask more. The little girl, Lily, was her daughter. Orhan. Jessica had won custody from her husband. Maybe our similar situations made us connect. She recommended a top lawyer named Emily and offered to advance my salary to pay for her. Over the next few days, Sarah called once. She asked why I was making things hard on myself by renting an apartment and working. She said we already cleared the air about Brad. She told me I could have whatever I wanted. I laughed. She had lied about firing Brad. I knew she had cheated on me 1,000,000 times in her mind before it became physical. I hung up on her, cursing. The next day I met the lawyer, Emily. I had been waiting for 30 minutes when she tapped the table and asked if we were getting this divorce or not. Being seen like this by my old high school rival was embarrassing. She looked at me coldly and said I had terrible taste in women. I told her we were doing it. She smiled briefly. She asked about custody. I told her I didn't want custody because the kid didn't like me. She agreed and promised to get me every penny I deserved because Sarah cheated. She said she had a natural sense of justice. I told her I had some evidence. She gave me a strange look and told me not to worry about evidence. It was the same look she gave me at my wedding. Back then, Emily showed up looking better than the bride. Sarah had been jealous. I thought she was crazy because I had always beaten Emily in school grades. That night, Emily texted me non-stop asking for documents. She worked fast. She said she would help me no matter the cost. My plan was to settle peacefully, but if Sarah refused, we'd go to court. After work one day, Sarah was waiting by my office. She blocked my path. Looking tired and angry. She said we needed to talk. I told her my lawyer would talk to her. She sneered and asked how I dared to let that woman Emily get involved. Just then, Emily appeared behind me, holding files. She told Sarah to address her properly as my lawyer. Sarah grabbed my wrist, refusing to let go. She smiled at Emily and said her reputation was about to be destroyed. Emily looked calm, but secretly emotional. She asked if I wanted to see the documents. Suddenly, a car door opened and Timmy rushed out. He pushed Emily aside and stood by his mother, yelling at Emily to stay away from his dad. Emily asked him how he knew she didn't have a husband. I frowned and told Sarah to consider the divorce seriously. I told Timmy to have his mother hire a new cook if he was hungry, because I wasn't his nanny anymore. Just then, a red sports car pulled up and Lily ran toward me, asking me to come to dinner. Timmy exploded with jealousy, screaming at Lily. Lily looked confused and said Timmy was weird. Sarah picked up the crying Timmy and looked at me coldly, saying I had a heart of stone and would regret this. In the days that followed, I saw Timmy a few times. Once he was with Brad. Brad admitted he didn't care if the scandal got out because he made more money from Sarah than he ever did acting. I recorded him on my phone. Sarah was a businesswoman who calculated everything, so she kept Brad just famous enough to be useful, but not enough to cause big trouble. A few days later, it was Lily's birthday. I went to Jessica's house and was surprised to see Emily there. Emily told me the divorce was moving fast. Then she said she was Lily's friend. Lily ran over and pointed at a photo on Emily's phone of me. Emily quickly covered her mouth. After dinner, Jessica told me about her past, how she was a maid for her ex-husband's family, and how they treated her like dirt. She told me not to try to change someone who doesn't like me. She hinted that Emily liked me. That night I drank too much. The next morning I remembered I had drunkenly asked Emily if she was for sale, like a mistress. She had played along. I texted her to apologize. She sent a photo of a bruise I apparently caused and told me I was violent when drunk. She seemed happy, though. Emily had gathered tons of evidence. The day I got my divorce certificate, I felt like I was back in that school hallway. I told Sarah it was over. She asked why, claiming the Brad thing was a misunderstanding. I told her she was blaming me again, and that I should have left years ago. She tried to use Timmy's sickness to guilt me, but I told her the Ross family had plenty of money for doctors. Emily got out of her car. Sarah told Emily she would never be happy because I wouldn't trust marriage again. Emily smiled and said she would take whatever role I gave her. She told Sarah she knew plenty of tricks. When Emily got in the car, I asked if Sarah hit her. She said it was nothing. I looked for the first aid kit. Emily tugged my sleeve and asked if I threw away the love letter she gave me in sophomore year because I hated her. I was shocked and said I never saw a letter. She told me to write her one then. I realized I had been wrong about her. I agreed to write it. She asked how long it would take. I said a lifetime. I applied medicine to her face. She grabbed my wrist and kissed my palm. In the years that followed, I lived freely. Sarah tried to call me when Timmy got sick because of her negligence, but I yelled at her and hung up. The boy went to live with his grandparents. I thought life would go on, but then I woke up one day back in my dorm room. I was 19 again, but I knew the future. The next morning, Sarah was waiting for me downstairs. She asked why I was backing out. I told her I didn't like her and never would. She didn't believe me and kept following me. One day she came in the rain with a kitten, trying to recreate moments from our past to win me over. She knelt and begged me not to leave her. I looked at her. I believed she was sincere right now. But I remembered the future where I got sick, and she had to beg for money to save me. She loved me, but my life had started over, and I wasn't going to gamble on it again. I walked away. I found Jessica handing out flyers on the street. I bought her a coffee. We became partners and built a huge company. She had a happy life with a good man. As for Sarah, her family went bankrupt, and she struggled. I helped fix a deal for her anonymously by wiping a rich man's shoes. Just like in the old timeline, but I never told her. One day I ran into Emily at a street corner. She wasn't the polished lawyer yet. She asked me if I threw away her letter because I hated her. I pretended to think and said I forgot. She looked sad. I smiled and told her she could always write me another one, and promised not to throw it away this time. She looked up in disbelief. I told her to take her time writing it.